We're very thankful for the ESPN folks for being very hospitable. Now, there are some people actively trying to sabotage us from within ESPN.
Funny.
More specifically, I believe Norby Williams is the guy who is attempting to sabotage our program.
After Pat McAfee called out ESPN executive Norby Williams,
there were certain narratives, when Michael Smith and I, when we were hosting The Six, we knew when Norby took over our show, he didn't really want us to be the anchors.
Jemele Hill gave her experience with the man.
I'm not 100% sure. That is just seemingly the only human that has information, and then somehow that information gets leaked and it's wrong, and then it sets a narrative of what our show is, and then are we just going to combat that from a rat every single time?
However, the conversation as of recent started with ESPN's $85 million signee, Pat McAfee.
Had he had a chance to go back in the DeLorean, he never would have chosen us to host this 6 o'clock show. That doesn't mean that we couldn't have had a successful show in spite of us not being his first choice. But I do think us not being his first choice, or being a choice, I should say, I think that hurt. It really did. And I don't think, while there was certainly a level of professional respect, I do think the narratives around our show, he didn't help to kill those. And I don't know how much he had to do with creating them, but I can say that, I certainly had my suspicions, especially when it came to certain narratives that our show was too political.
This was the takeaway, mainly from the conservative right, like Jason Whitlock, who she refused to work for while both were at ESPN, like Outkick's Clay Travis, who saw an avenue to exploit right-wing sympathies and ended up selling his company to another entity that made Hill a target, which is, of course, Fox News. The endless barrage of hate made ESPN uncomfortable, and they would cave, canning her show completely. Hill would reflect.
We had the personality wall behind us that used to be kind of a signature component of our set, and I already knew the picture that bothered him was probably the picture, especially given the climate, was the picture that Mike and I both took with President Obama, who was a fan of our show. And we had that on display every day, and they made us take all that down. And he was the one who engineered doing that.
Interesting anecdote. The follow-up I would have, of course, is this. Is Williamson ticked because he is a staunch Donald Trump supporter? Or is it because he thought President Obama was terrible? Or is it that he just still believes somehow to this day that sports aren't political? Because, oh boy, has he seen the Pat McAfee show lately? My goodness.
This has something to do with the Epstein list that came out?
A lot of people, including Jimmy Kimmel, are really hoping that doesn't happen.
All right.
Because for him, not only does he give time to Rogers, a conspiracy theorist, anti-vax, melted brain Facebook post in human form.
Somebody that I don't like that guy. That guy left me in his office for 45 minutes, no-showed me in 2018. So this guy has had zero respect for me. And in return, same thing back to him for a long time. So even with that taking place and potential PR, we're still growing somehow.
But he's been called out on McAfee's own show, on Williamson's own network, of employment. Hill would then tweet after the McAfee call out, "I can relate."
Other things that got back to us about what he said about us in meetings and meeting with other people, we didn't appreciate it. And so when Pat McAfee talked about how narratives are spun about his show and the sabotage, when I tweeted, "I can relate," that's what I was talking about. Because people got this idea that our show wasn't about sports, when 99.9% of the time we talked about sports. Sure. We didn't talk about politics. We didn't talk about, we weren't opening the show talking about immigration reform, seeing where things turn. I was like, shit, I wish we would have, right? I was like, maybe we should have started off the top of the show, talking about reparations. I don't know. I think maybe that might have worked.
Let's pause here. To give an idea of how much the narrative has shifted because of the McAfee effect and in turn the Rogers effect playing out on the worldwide leader and saying the things he has, heavy right-wing outlets have titled some videos, "Aaron Rodgers comes back on the Pat McAfee show after getting backlash over fake story about ESPN ban." Outkick had ESPN cast off Charlie Arnolt. on a video titled Aaron Rodgers blasts Jimmy Kimmel and woke media. Aaron Rodgers shocks everyone by returning to the Pat McAfee show after ban. They duped everyone, wrote another titled in the right-wing pipeline. The contrasting styles are alarming as much as they are polarizing.
We felt really undermined at a lot of different points. All of that was not on Norby for sure, but I don't think he helped and I don't think he stopped it. And so I definitely could understand why Pat McAfee would immediately point to him as being somebody, knowing that he wasn't a fan, knowing, that maybe some things were said internally that we're not privy to that probably got back to Pat McAfee. And that's probably why he said what he said.
Quite honestly, it must feel odd, very odd for someone like a Jemele Hill, for someone like a Michael Smith, for many who worked at ESPN and were told over and over, stop politicizing everything. Sports are not political. Don't do that. Don't write that. Don't say that. Making calls to writers and telling them not to tweet anything on the subject. And now, with the Donald Trump years and largely with the Max and Stephen A debates about Colin Kaepernick, Stephen A having, now in present day, Chris giving a stamp of approval and his endorsement of Chris Christie, who just practically resigned from the presidential race, having Byron Donalds on his platform, having Clay Travis on his platform. The leave sports and politics separate casket has been blown off completely. The better question is, what does ESPN do? And where do they go from here? Because the days of yesteryears, and Norby Williamson has been reported to have loved the Mike and Mike show and the Dan Patrick days and the Keith Olbermann days, because the market is oversaturated and those days are long gone. The question is, how do they adapt? They will remain afloat because they carry games, but what do they do in that time between? That's the big question.
He mentioned ivermectin being horse-based and pushed that whole narrative for a long time. He gave a platform to one of the biggest spreaders of misinformation during the COVID times, Dr. Fauci. There's a lot of old papers and files and different things about interactions that Navy pilots have had, especially Navy pilots, I believe, with unidentified flying objects. So this is not surprising. Obviously, there was some sort of Chinese spy balloon that was up in the air,
lasers,
allegedly, and there's been a few other objects that have been shot down. I believe that this has been going on for a long time. Interesting timing on everything. There's a lot of other things going on in the world.
What?
like what?
Well, you're saying you're saying, oh, looky here. Is that what you just said? Bang. That's what you said?
Could be some of that, yeah. Did you hear about the Epstein client list about to be released, too? There's some files that have some names on it that might be getting released pretty soon.
Oh.